Hello to all of our spectacular, legit KidLit viewers. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Alexis. Thanks for waiting for us. We had some technical issues. We're the hosts of Legit KidLit, and today is a really exciting day because we are featuring authors of one of our favorite types of books, novels in verse. Before we get into what exactly a novel in verse is, let's introduce our panel. Hello, novel in verse authors. Introduce yourself in a haiku. And let's start with Cordelia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cordelia Jensen. Here's my haiku. In Philly with twins, teaching, writing, editing, everything in verse.
I love that. And what are some of your books that you have written?
I've written 3 verse novels, Skyscraping, which is YA, and The Way the Light Bends, which is also YA, and then I co-authored Every Shiny Thing with Lori Morrison, which is a middle grade book, and my characters in verse and Lori's characters in prose. There it is. There's the paperback.
Yes. I have mine, I think, at school, the hardback. So I had the 2 different versions. Amanda, your turn.
Hi, my haiku is she had so many children, she knew exactly what to do, write books. And that's because I have 4 kids and one on the way, and it's a lot of children. And I get lots of book ideas from them. So that has been fun. I am an author of middle grade novels as well as picture books. So my middle grade novel that's already out is The 3 Rules of Everyday Magic. That one's written in prose. Then I have 2 picture books, You'll Find Me and My Pet Cloud. And my next book coming out in September is my first verse novel, and that's The Hope of Elephants. I have my one single copy right here. So that's my first novel. I'm very excited about it.
I love that cover. Is that a baseball
Yeah,
glove?
it is. It's a baseball glove holding an origami elephant.
Oh, that's so cute. All right. And Jane?
I am Jane Kuo. My haiku is, in the mirror, my 11-year-old self asks, please tell my story. And I am the author of In the Beautiful Country, which is coming out on June 28th. It's my first novel in verse, and the story is loosely based on my own life experience. It's about a Taiwanese immigrant girl's first year in America. So yeah, I just have one verse novel out, but I'm actually currently working on the revision for my second novel, which is coming out in a year. And it's a standalone, but it's also kind of a continuation of In the Beautiful Country. And the title is Land of Broken Promises.
I'm excited there's another one. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that. And novels in verse have been around since the 1800s. So, in a basic sense, they are stories told through poetry form. And for me, it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I actually read my first novel in verse, which I believe was Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. And I haven't stopped reading them since. So once I hear that a book is a novel in verse, I almost always have to read it.
Same. One of my favorites, and didn't even really realize it until I became a teacher and we started talking about novels in verse, but my favorite book growing up was Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. And now I know it's a novel in verse, but and it's I mean that was in the 90s, 2000s. So they've been around, but that is like my love. That book is just my favorite.
And
Emotional ties.
Colleen says it's hard to keep novels in verse in their library.
Yes, same with my classroom library. They're kind of a go-to for readers, all kinds of readers. So, what about you all? Did you have any favorite novel and verse? Like, what were some of your favorites as you were reading? Whoever wants to share.
I'll go. So my first novel in verse was also Out of the Dust. That I can remember. There might have been different ones, but it was Out of the Dust. And I actually performed it. I was on speech and debate in high school, and I actually performed it for the poetry category. And I didn't do very well a lot of times because a lot of the judges would be like, this doesn't seem like poetry. This is a dramatic interpretation. I was like, it's a novel in verse, it's poetry. But so I read that one as a kid, and I loved that one, especially because I was a pianist, and so I loved that whole story. And then I didn't really read many more or get back into them until I read Inside Out and Back Again, which is just gorgeous, and it's hard for anything to compete with that one, even still. But that was the one that really, as an adult, got me back into loving verse. And then I would say Kwame Alexander's books really pulled me in, as well as Long Way Down. I think were kind of game changers for me.
Yeah, those are like music whenever
Yeah,
you read them.
and I'm not saying this to suck up to anyone, but also Cordelia's first book was I read it right before I started writing my own novel in verse, and it was hugely influential, and I loved it so much. So
Thank you. I actually didn't read, I don't think I read any as a kid. I didn't really, I mean, I read a lot of poetry, but not verse novels necessarily. I was really introduced to the form when I was getting my MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and I worked with Co Booth my first semester there, and I was working on like a middle grade prose novel set at camp, and Co thought I could do better work. So I sent her these 5 poems I had written about my dad dying of AIDS in 1994 after I graduated high school, and they were you know, poems that came directly from my life. And she said, Cordelia, have you ever heard of a YA verse novel? And I said, no, but and she's like, this is what you have to be writing. And so Skyscraping actually started as a memoir in verse that I worked on at VCFA, and then worked on it, and then I fictionalized it. But I worked on it for 2 years there before it sold, or before I got my agent.
Very cool.
But Inside Out and Back Again, Inside Out and Back Again and Long Way Down are probably also my very favorite verse novels, and they're the ones that I teach a lot of verse novel specific classes for highlights, and I often use those books as examples.
I'm just going to have to jump in because I don't want to, I did not succumb to peer pressure, but definitely I'm going to have to say Inside Out and Back Again as well. And so many things that both of you said that really echo in my life too. I really tried to actually write my story as a memoir, you know, even an adult memoir, and I just couldn't find a way in. It was only after reading Inside Out and Back Again that I was able to kind of discover my voice, and then I found tremendous freedom in the verse novel form. So
that's one that I actually forgot about, and I hate that I did, because I think it's one of the first, I think, Kwame Alexander crossover, and Inside Out and Back Again, like right when I got back into reading as a teacher, I was like, those were what I found. So I love that you guys brought those up. Thank you.
And so how would you all describe a novel in verse, and how would you say it's different from a novel or book? And we kind of touched upon that a little bit, but what else would you add?
Maybe Jane, you can explain, like, how did it help you explore, since the memoir wasn't working?
Sure, yeah. Like I said, I found tremendous freedom in the form because I didn't necessarily kind of have to like follow just traditional ways of writing prose and even grammar. There could be snippets, there could be like a bit more of a stream of consciousness type writing. And then I really appreciated the fact that I could skip through big swaths of time, or have it covered in just a few phrases or sentences, or I could drill down deeper into something that maybe was only a few seconds in chronological time, but then I could spend, the equivalent of pages on that. So I think that it was just very freeing for me, and I love how, in some ways, it's so it can be actually quite experimental, really, and I love how that is grants like accessibility to all different types of readers.
Yeah, I love what you said, and I think that the expansiveness of the form is what I love most about it. So that some verse novels are truly like a poem per page, and then some are, break the line and use some poetic techniques, but maybe aren't truly a poem per page. But that's okay too. Like that creates a certain atmosphere, and you're still using some poetic elements. So I just like that there's so much room for experiment, and that you have this whole huge toolbox of poetry techniques that you can use while telling a story, and it just can make for a lot of creativity and creative license.
Yeah, I liked what Jane said about being able to skip large swaths of time and then being able to like spend pages on something that didn't take very long. What I've noticed is, because I write both prose and verse novels, I really have to, each story I have to figure out, like, is this story meant to be told in prose or verse? And a lot of times I'll like try out a book in verse, and my agent will be like, I'm not sure this is quite right. I think it's going to be a mixture. But usually what tips me off that my book is supposed to be in verse rather than prose is if the majority of the action is very internal for my character. I feel like novels in verse allow a lot more internal reflection, and then and allow you to explore things that are really hard in a way that doesn't get overwhelming or feel like navel gazing, or get like slow on the page in a way that they would in a prose format.
So, do you all think it's harder to write in verse, or is it easier because it kind of just flows? What do you all think? And if someone is looking to write in verse, how would you explain that experience? Just jump right in if you have a thought.
I'll go first. I would say not necessarily that it's harder or easier, but it's just different. It's just a very different experience, and I think each one has things that are harder or easier. Like I love that I don't have to write as many words in a verse novel, but I have to be a lot more careful with them.
Yeah.
I would say I find verse novels more fun to write, though, because of the experimentation aspect of them.
I think the hardest part of writing in verse is like the loss of secondary character development and the majority of the dialogue, So like Amanda's saying, they are usually more internal, but you still have to have action, and you have to have characters, and you have to have events that take place. And so getting those onto the page with a small amount of words and you're more limited. But I think what's very fun is like writing in snapshots. I guess that's the way I see verse novels a lot, as like a series of snapshots, and then figuring out how to string them together, where you need to have a poem that's like maybe all an emotional reflection of the action that just happened, or like, I think that part can be really energizing.
I've only written in verse, and I mean successfully. So I feel like it's easier for me. I think that just it's when you kind of come to a blank page, and it just feels like I don't have to worry about setting. I don't have to worry about, exposition and all of that. So that just feels, that just is a tremendous burden that's lifted off of me. And then it just feels much more playful and fun, and the stakes are lower. So, yeah.
I wish my students could hear that, because I feel like our poetry unit is always some of them are super excited, but for some reason, a lot are just so scared of poetry. But I will say, after I read to the class uh, Chris Barron's Magical and Perfect. They were amazed that that was a way to tell a story. And I think knowing that, they could possibly write their own poems, like a story poem, and maybe knowing that they didn't have to plot out like a huge narrative or something, that it was different. I think that's a good point. So maybe using those as mentor texts to kind of show how poetry doesn't have to feel like a huge, emotional journey, even though it is. It doesn't have to have all that weight. So I don't know if that made sense, but I really like how you put that. So we want to remind our viewers that we do have 2 giveaways going on. So we're going to give away during our live to one of our viewers from our live 2 of Ellen Hopkins. She couldn't make it today, but 2 of her books, Closer to Nowhere and What About Will. And then we are also going to give away on Twitter, whoops, too far, Cordelia's 3 books, Every Shiny Thing, which is middle grade, and her 2 young adult books, The Way the Light Bends and Skyscraping. So thank you for sharing those with us and our viewers. Let's end with, what are some novels in verse you have recently read and recommend? I'm going to recommend, because I just read it, Jane's In This Beautiful Country. It was phenomenal, and I couldn't stop reading. So much emotion. Tiffany, what about you? What have you read recently?
I have so many that I could recommend, but and some of you mentioned some of them as well, like The Magical and Perfect by Chris Barron. I recently read Lifeboat 12 by Susan Hood, which I think it's not newer, but I just hadn't read it until now, and I really enjoyed that one. So I'll say that one, and then I'm going to throw in The Canyon's Edge by Dusty Bowling.
Oh, that one was heart-pounding. Wow. What about you, Amanda?
So I would recommend Golden Girl by Reem Faruqi. I thought it was just I really loved it. I loved her debut, Unsettled, but I loved the character in Golden Girl, and it reminded me of Every Shiny Thing. It actually deals with kleptomania and that sort of thing. So I enjoyed it. It was good. And I also read the 12 Ravens, or the 7th Raven. The 7th Raven by, I think, David Elliott or something. And he's the one who also wrote the novel, the YA novel in verse about
It's called Bull.
he wrote that one, and he also wrote the one about Joan of Arc.
Okay.
And his novels in verse are always so interesting because he keeps a very structured sort of format. He's very structured in like his syllables and his rhyming. And so it's very interesting to see what he does. So those are the 2 I'd recommend.
I am actually using his as a mentor text for my own novel in verse, his and Out of the Dust. But the way, I learned so much from him, The 7th Raven, structure-wise. Cordelia?
Yeah, I love Bull by David Elliott. It's like in 6 different types of form poems. But somebody mentioned here Alone by Megan E. Freeman. And I think what's cool about that book is that it's the first dystopian verse novel that I've read. And I just think it's cool that it used to be that like you had to have a certain kind of plot to write in verse. And now it just seems like it's like all blown wide open. So I appreciated that. And that's like a different way she is all alone. So like it is an internal story too. So it makes sense. 2 YA verse novels I really love that are more recent is Lawless Spaces by Corian Haydu, which is written, there's like a present tense or present time period main character, but then there's a notebook that's passed along in her family. And so we also get to hear from her mother and her grandmother and her great grandmother even, all when they're 16. It's just really the world building is really good in that one. And Everybody Looking by Candace Elo. I love that. I really like how meandering the structure of that one is, and it doesn't really follow a traditional arc plot, but also goes back and forth in time quite a lot. And yeah, that was a lot.
It's great. I don't think this was written very recently, but and I only have one recommendation. The book is called Love, Love by Victoria Chang. Yeah, so I read it about a year ago. I really appreciated the voice, and Victoria Chang's quite an interesting artist. I think jokingly I would probably say I want to be like her when I grow up, but I'm probably older than her. But she's like a National Book Award winner for her adult poems, and I think she heads like an MFA school of writing, Antioch, I think. But she's also written a picture book, and then this one middle grade verse novel, loosely, I think, based on her own experience of growing up in Michigan. So yeah, that was well done.
I love how, like, you think you know all the books that are out there, and then you hear more people talk about more books, and you realize that there's so many more that you need to go and grab, and your TBR piles up. But a novel in verse really rejuvenates you. It inspires you, and it can take you over that reading slump that you've been in. So, listen to the recommendations here by these lovely authors, and check some out.
Yeah, and thank you to our viewers, especially those who showed up live. Thanks, Christy, Colleen, and E-Train. We appreciate having our wonderful authors with us. We hope you enjoyed our show and are inspired to pick up some incredible and inspiring books. We'll include information for all of those books that we recommended, information about all of these authors in our description below. And we'll be on our Twitter doing our giveaway.
All right. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Alexis.
And we're signing off. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.